Welcome to this Mid-America Region program, a monthly gathering and training for the Congregational board members serving our congregations in the Mid-America region. My name is Lauren Wyeth, and my pronouns are she or they. I am a white person in my mid-50s with curly shoulder-length blondish brown hair, and I'm wearing tortoiseshell glasses tonight. I have on a cozy sweater that's blues and greens and white. And I'm in my office, attic office in Minneapolis. Behind me is a bulletin board over one shoulder and over the other, a chalice. And I serve as one of your staff for the Mid-America region, and I am the congregational consultant that works with our large congregations and serves as the faith development specialist for our region. So, just want to acknowledge, because I said the word Minneapolis, that it's on my mind and possibly on yours, that there is a world outside of the rooms that we occupy right now, and it's a little bit on fire, as it often is. So we do what we have practiced for moments such as these. We gather, we reach out to one another. We tell the truth about what we notice in the world. We share ideas about how to meet that, what our values call us to do. And one of the things we're learning is that taking care of each other and taking shifts are two things that are really necessary in this time and probably always have been. So we double down on that. And we skill up, and that's what we're here for tonight. Tonight's gathering is also an opportunity for us all to practice some of the key skills that are essential for these times just in our interactions with one another. So we ask that you lean into those skills as you're interacting with others this evening, and we suggest the following group norms, which you'll find in the chat. Again, thanks, Chanel. We ask that you take care of yourself, whatever you need to do to take care of yourself this evening during this time, and extend grace as others do the same. You're invited to share, but it's always okay to pass or to pause when you need a little time. We invite you to share the time with one another, especially when you're in breakout groups, being aware of taking some time, if that's the bigger challenge for you, or leaving some time for others if that's where you need to bring your attention tonight. We ask that we each speak from our own experience, and we know that there will be multiple perspectives. There's not one way to do anything that we're going to be talking about tonight, and so we're not going to expect agreement or unanimity. We are, in fact, by design pluralistic, aren't we? We'll pause for repair when we need to, and we'll make room for joy, for laughter, for curiosity, for growth and change, for sadness and silence. And we'll honor confidentiality. I like the little mnemonic that the lessons leave and the stories stay. A few brief administrative notes. We will be recording the portions of the program when we're together in the large group tonight. So if you don't want to be in the recording, you can turn off your camera in the large group time. We'll also be going into breakout groups, as I mentioned earlier, based on congregational size. Those are not recorded. If you haven't done so already, please follow the link in the chat for instructions on how to determine and indicate which group you belong in. All right, so thank you and welcome. We're glad that you're here with us this evening, and I turn it to you, Chelsea.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chelsea Krafka. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am joined this evening by my cat Basil, who is looking at me very adoringly. I am a light-skinned, middle-aged woman, a mixed race with long brown hair. I'm wearing a gray striped cardigan, and I'm the Mid-America Administrator and Program Specialist. Your other Mid-America staff will introduce themselves throughout the program, but I want to lift up and thank Chanel Gomez from the events team for serving as our tech host tonight. You'll see Chanel in the chat and can message her for tech support at any time. So now I invite you to settle into the space with our chalice lighting reading. If you have a chalice nearby, feel free to light it with me. These words come to us from Ruth E. Gibson, and this reading is called Learning from Daffodils. When you look at a daffodil, there are lots of things you notice. Almost no one ever notices the little withered brown bit at the base of the flower, but it's really important. When the daffodils come up, the ground is still pretty hard and there is sometimes cold and snow. So at first, the daffodils have a tough green skin protecting their blossoms. After it gets warmer, the daffodil doesn't need this protection and it shrivels and dies. Often in our lives, just as for the daffodil, some part of us has to shrivel up and die so that some new part of us can grow and give beauty to the world. Oddly enough, though, the dead, shriveled up part of a daffodil doesn't fall away. There are two things we can learn from a daffodil to help ourselves and each other. We can be brave and wise enough when the right time comes to push out from under the tough skins of our souls that protect us from all that is hard and harsh, that can damage the more fragile parts of ourselves. We can let some parts of ourselves die so that new parts of ourselves can live in beauty. We can hold on to the shriveled up dead bits, especially if doing so helps us remember to honor and value all parts of ourselves, all parts of our experience. Just because we don't need that part or that way of being in the world now doesn't mean that part has no value. It was very necessary to have that protection then, and very good to remember and appreciate it now. I'll light the chalice here and move my cat so he does not hurt himself.
My name is Kiana Dene Perkins. I currently am in Ann Arbor, Michigan. My pronouns are she and her. I am a Black woman with a headband on. I have on colorful glasses. You might be able to see my locks, which are on a black jacket, and my locks go down past my jacket, and I have a lighter colored shirt on underneath. I serve our small congregations here in the Midwest region, and I love doing it. It's my favorite thing. We will soon be heading into breakout groups, but first, please take a moment to reflect and let us know what trends and themes you're noticing in your congregation using the form you'll find in the chat. We invite you to engage in this practice each time we gather. Your responses help your primary contact respond to your needs and inform the larger Mid America team of trends and themes in our region that we can support as they emerge and evolve. You'll find that in the chat, and we'll give you all a few minutes to click it open and make some notes. All right, friends. So we are going to head into breakout groups for 10 to 12 minutes and return here at 10 till the hour, right around there. You'll be invited in the small group to introduce yourself and share a little bit about the themes or trends that are happening in your congregation.
Thank you all. Welcome back. I hope you had a good conversation checking in with one another. Uh, my name is David Pyle. I serve as the regional lead for the Mid-America region of the Unitarian Universalist Association. I am a light-skinned, white-identified man in my early 50s with brown hair that is quickly growing blonde. I prefer to think of it as blonde, not gray. I am wearing a light gray polo shirt, or not polo, but sweater, and I am in my home office. I have blue eyes, and I'm in my home office in Oak Grove, Kentucky. And behind me, I've never said this in one of these, is a banner, applique banner that was a gift to me from the last congregation I served as a minister in Ventura, California, that hung in the chancel for the last 6 months that I was the minister there. So it is good to be with you all this evening, and I always love when people return to a program. The as we're engaging today in the our board Mid-America Region Board Members series, the topic of assessing where we are so we can know where to go. It's good to have you all with us today. So the a little more about this series for those that have not been in earlier sessions. Each month we will explore a different topic of board leadership, of with this month's focus being on the board's responsibility to assess how well the congregation is fulfilling its mission. Um, each month there'll be a short presentation like this that's about 30 minutes long, and then some group discussion time based on the congregational size in the groups you were just in before with your congregational primary contacts. Most of the materials from this will either be sent out or can be found in the Board Basics course or the Board Foundations course on the UUA Leader Lab. And I also highly recommend that if you want to go deeper into your own practice as a board member, the UU Institute course titled UU Board Foundations. All of those are wonderful resources. So, congregational assessment. Now, I said to the staff when we were pre-planning for this session that this is usually the part in this workshop series where people start to go to sleep. Because the idea of congregational assessment, I have found, it's the point where people begin to say in the workshop series, David, do you really expect boards to do all of these things? And the thing I want you to hear about this one is, this is one that I really expect that the board is going to delegate this responsibility because boards have lots of other things that they need to be doing. Gathering this information is something that other people can help you with. But the board needs to be able to give good guidance on what's the questions that the board needs to know how well the congregation is fulfilling the congregation's mission. So, because in order for the board to be able to know where the congregation should go to in fulfilling the congregation's mission, you have to have a good idea of where you are. And it is the board's task to ensure that it is assessing, with the help of the congregation, the vitality of the congregation in its wholeness, not just parts of it. And as a side note that we're not going to get into today, this will be a later session, but I just want to highlight it. The board also has a responsibility to assess its own functioning and its own relationships. Checking in on, as we began with this series, we talked about the relationship between board members and how important that is to keep covenantal and to maintain. So checking in on that, assessing the board's practices and its policies, and assessing the board's relationship with the executive. That's the minister in some congregations, it may be an administrator in others. Those are all a part of assessment that's not what we're doing tonight, but I didn't want to miss it because that is a session we will talk about a little later, how to assess how well your board is doing at being a board. So, congregational assessment. There are ways that it is really easy. Many of us have done some form of assessment in professional life. If you're in academia, there's assessment of courses. If you are in a business environment, there's assessment of products or assessment of marketing lines. There's many different ways that we do assessment. In some ways, assessing in a congregational setting can be easier because for the first one, no one really expects that, not, I won't say no one. Most people don't expect that there are effective metrics to measure spiritual growth and transformation. Right. So you can find metrics and you can look for them, but congregational assessment is less often about finding metrics. The metric of how many people attended an OWL program might be useful, but how transformative that OWL program was in the lives of those attended is even more useful. So it's often less metric driven than it is in some other settings. Congregational assessment uh, is also easier because the leaders you're asking to assess the programs are often really deeply connected into those programs. It's not often somebody from outside that is doing that assessment for you. It's often your congregation members that are learning more about how things are going. Um, and it can also be spread out across both the staff and the lay leadership. So instead of having one or two people whose responsibility is assessing the performance of the institution, this is an all congregation, this can be an all congregation experience where different groups are learning different things. And it's also easier in that it's about gathering information more than it is about providing judgments. Congregational assessment is really about trying to understand where are we and how are things functioning so that we can fulfill the mission of the congregation. Now, there are some ways that congregational assessment is more difficult than in some other settings. I don't know if you've noticed, but holding volunteers accountable can be really difficult, right? And no one wants to say that the beloved thing that you are deeply committed to is really not fulfilling the congregation's mission. It can be relationally more difficult to be able to do assessment in a congregational setting than in some other places and spaces. And that applies even with staff. Being able to assess that maybe this congregational program isn't meeting the needs that we would hope it would be meeting is a hard conversation to have. There are also always more possible ministries, more ways to fulfill a congregation's mission than any congregation has the resources, time, experience, money to be able to fulfill. Every congregational assessment is, in the end, about making some choices between what are the ways that we are resourced, capable, and equipped to affect change, missional change in the world right now. And that can actually be hard when people are invested or they want a particular thing to happen, but it isn't the best way to use the congregation's resources in that moment. Uh, Volunteers often, in my experience any kind of assessment process as a kind of judgment. And diffusing that is one of the hardest tasks of any good congregational assessment program. Inviting people into being part of assessing a congregation's program, assessing a ministry or an aspect of the congregation's operation, so that it feels less like a judgment that people experience of something that they have dedicated their own time, talent, and treasure to bringing into the world. And congregational staff often can experience assessment programs by a congregational board with some particular anxiety. Some of this is similar to the judgment feeling that often volunteers experience, but also congregations, especially in these times, are in often lean economic stances, and congregational staff, are always worried for whether or not they're going to be able to continue in their role. Whether an assessment program by a congregational board is about economizing. Um, so I just wanted to name those ways that it can be easier in some settings, but than some other settings, but also harder to do good and effective congregational assessment as a board. There also one other thing I wanted to begin with, and that is that there's some necessary boundaries. There is a a difference between assessing your congregation's ministries and providing performance appraisal for your congregation's professional minister or staff. And this is really confusing because some of the great resources and tools out there attempt to do both at the same time. And even if you're in a policy governance congregation, it's expected that the only assessment you do of your executive is whether or not the institution is fulfilling its ministry, its missional ministries. That's particular for those that are in strict policy governance settings. But the just if you are using a process that is intended to both gather data and provide a performance appraisal for your staff, at the same time you're gathering data about the congregation's mission, the board has a special responsibility to be able to separate that data out. Because the data you need for providing good performance appraisal for your professional staff and the data you need to plan for fulfilling your congregation's mission for the long term is different data with different purposes. So even if you're using a same program to gather that data, such as the UUMA program Fulfilling the Call, which is one of the primary ones that attempts to do both in the same data gathering program, realizes the board has a responsibility to separate that data out and use it for different purposes. And you're not limited to that one way of gathering data. I'm going to talk about several different ways in this that you can gather data as a board as part of your responsibility to assess how well the congregation is fulfilling the mission. So your assessment process, however you design it, whoever you task to do an assessment on behalf of the board, it should be based in your board's understanding of the congregation's mission, and we've talked in other sessions about how you continually develop your board's understanding of the congregation's mission. Everything comes back to the congregation's mission. But it's also about the board's fiduciary responsibility to use the congregation's resources to fulfill the mission. One of the big questions for any congregational assessment process is this program, is this operational area, is this functioning in the way that best utilizes our resource in order to fulfill the mission? And the other assessment criteria is the area you're assessing uh, uh, abiding by the congregation's established procedures and policies? And if not, does it need to abide by them, or do the procedures and policies need to adapt themselves? So for the purpose of congregational assessment, I use a breakdown of different aspects of the congregation. There are many ways you could think of the dynamic relationships and programs and aspects of a congregation, but this is the one we'll be using today. And that is the difference between congregational operations versus congregational ministries. Now, notice I said ministries, not ministry, or minister, because the ministries of a congregation are far broader than just the professional staff. Hopefully, the ministries are all of the programmatic aspects of the congregation. For congregational operations, this is the physical properties, the grounds and equipment, the staffing structures and the policies, the personnel policies, employee benefits, contractor relationships. It's all the things, all the support structure necessary to make the ministries of the congregation possible. So that's one framing to think about. The other framing, the other aspect is the congregational ministries. This is the program, the congregation's worship, RE, its justice programs, all of the small group ministries, all the community relationships, all the ways you are seeking to bring the congregation's mission into the world, right? So one is the support structures that make the mission possible, and the other is the ways you are living the congregation's mission. Hold this framing in mind. We're going to talk about it when we look at different ways of understanding congregational assessment processes. Now, I just put this slide in here because often I'll have a couple policy governance congregations in the program, just to say it really is important. There are some governance systems that require you do the assessment process and the performance appraisal process together. And I just want to highlight that if you're in one of those kinds of systems, the board has a responsibility to draw two sets of data from it. One set of data that is about helping the minister and the professional staff to develop to provide good performance appraisal. The other is the data that the board needs to do good planning for the future and assessing the effectiveness of its mission and its policies. And just to say that my experience is they get lost in each other often when they are drawn together in one process. So as I said, it's usually in this part of when I'm doing this material that somebody says, is this just another thing that the board has to do? And the good news I want to share with you all is the board's role here can be pretty minimal. The board's role is that their responsibility to make sure that it is receiving the information it needs to fulfill its fiduciary responsibilities, to understand its mission imperatives. The board's role is to define what information we need to receive about how well we are living our mission as a congregation, and then to assign different aspects of the congregation to help get that information for you. Does that make sense? There may occasionally be some topic that's maybe sensitive, or maybe some board members have real investment in, where the board wants to conduct the assessment itself. And often this is around professional staff performance, but even that can be delegated to a ministry team or a personnel committee. So who can do the congregational assessment, help the board to gather that information? Who can do good congregational assessment on behalf of the governing board? Well, the first one is a standing committee of the board for congregational assessment. There are congregations, and you all know this, there are people in congregations who love to study things, who love to go find out how well are we doing on this thing compared to other congregations? What are the possibilities for us? How in the world do we move the two services in a way that doesn't alienate half the congregation? What that are really good at doing that kind of study. And the congregations can find those people and make that their congregational volunteer responsibility. So there are some congregations that have named a part of the congregation. Sometimes it's part of the responsibility of the committee on ministry. Sometimes it's part of a responsibility of a standing committee on assessment. But this is one way that the board can have a group that is dedicated to leading, developing that information and providing it to the board. There are also times where a specific question might draw the board to want to create a time-limited task force to go get that information on behalf of the board. When I do this workshop with a single congregation, I ask them, and I'm going to challenge you all later, so this is a little bit of prep work, to think through what are two aspects of your congregation that you want to learn more about this year, that you want to see how you are doing. And one of those may be something that a task force can go develop that information. I will say that when I was serving one congregation, we developed a task force to assess whether there were better ways we could manage the aesthetics of our building with all of our renters and all of our properties. And they took about 6 weeks to do that study for us and come back with a set of recommendations for the board. Staff can also do this kind of assessment on behalf of the board. And this happens all the time. Boards ask staff to go find out about something, find data, and staff often have a lot of great resources and knowledge. The only caution I give about asking staff to do assessment work is that they have a lot to do already. And so, asking, being cautious about asking. You have a whole lot of other members of the congregation that you can draw into being part of your congregational governance leadership by asking them to be a part of answering a question on behalf of the board. Um, the committees and ministry teams are also a great way. If you've got a question about religious education, asking your religious education committee to do some study about that thing and report back to the board. One, that often feels really empowering, especially if they were involved in helping to develop the question, not just a question that comes solely from the board. But also it lets them, they're the ones closest to that ministry. They're the ones that understand the dynamics and the challenges best. And especially if the assessment involves talking to other religious education committees and other congregations about how they might be addressing a particular problem or concern, that can be really empowering to your congregational committees. We'll name one that involves the Building and Grounds Committee a little bit later. And then outside consultants can also sometimes do assessments, although I will say this comes at a cost. Your congregational life staff occasionally can help point you in the direction of an outside consultant. But the big one is one of the programs that consulting groups that we are in a relationship with is known as Stewardship for Us. And they often will come in and do some assessments around a congregation stewardship capacity, maybe leading into a capital campaign. Or, there are outside consultants that can help you with some assessment processes. I highly recommend working with Stewardship for Us if your congregation is asking questions about your capacity for increasing financial stewardship or during a capital campaign. So what is the board's role in congregational assessment? The primary role is for the board to discern what information the board needs about the congregation's ministry and operations, and what questions will help get to that information. We did some work earlier in an earlier session on powerful questions, and taking a powerful question or that framework and asking it as a congregational assessment is a great way to both involve the congregation in the missional formation of open questions, but also to get really good data for the congregational board. The second board is to create and task the systems to get that information, which may be different for each question. You may have one question that your standing committee of the board on assessment is the right place. But another question that really would be good if the finance committee goes and finds that answer, right? The and giving helping to give good feedback to those systems. So having them report into the board about what they're finding during their assessment process as they're learning to gather that information and being able to say, yes, this is the kind of information that we, the board, need, or maybe we need to refine the question a little bit more to give you a little more guidance about what it is we're actually looking for. And then the board's responsibility is to receive that information and incorporate it into planning and into policy. So the board framing the question, making sure that you've done some good work around who's going to be asking and researching that question, to provide feedback to those systems as they are doing the work of researching that question, and then to receive the information in a way that actually makes that information useful. One of the most disheartening things in a congregation is for the board or others to ask a group of lay leaders to go spend time and effort researching into a question, and that group presents that information, and then it seems to have no effect on congregational policy. On the board, when you ask the question, you're taking on a responsibility to use that information well. And I think to report back to those congregational leaders and volunteers how that information impacted the board's thinking. So, so I have 4 questions that are completely made up by me to give you an example of questions, assessment questions that the board might want to ask someone to engage. The first one is, what are the major maintenance needs of our building for the next 20 years? Everybody's roof has a lifespan. Everybody's boiler or HVAC system has a lifespan, and somebody can go find out what all those are. So creating a board task force, maybe it's made up of some members of the finance committee and some members of the building and grounds committee, that will create a 20-year building maintenance plan. They're going to go do the assessment. And you might need to provide some funding and budget to pay some contractors to come in and assess the lifespan of your roof, assess the lifespan of because the second biggest investment a congregation has in its mission is its physical plant. The biggest investment is the staff. But, protecting and making sure that that investment is available to fulfill the mission for the long term is a fiduciary responsibility of the board. So requiring that task force maybe to report quarterly, and that in 9 months they will have what is that recommended plan, and they come to you with that recommendation and the board accepts it. That's now a policy. And maybe that part of that policy is how the board is going to set aside a certain amount of money every year in the budget to be able to fund that plan over the 20 years of maintaining the congregation's physical property. Another question a board might ask to do an assessment of, and I think boards can ask 1 or 2 good assessment questions be asked by the congregation a year. What are the potential areas of justice in our community where we could make a real difference if we focused on them? This is a powerful question to ask a congregation's social justice committees and programs, and to have them come together to give the board an assessment of what are 2 or 3 areas where if we really invested our time and our effort, we could make a real difference in our community on these justice areas. I'm not saying that many of our congregations are kind of scattershot in their approach to justice ministries, but having 2 or 3, and then maybe have the congregation vote on which of those 2 or 3 most fulfills the congregation's mission, to be able to invest as a community the congregation's time, talent, and treasure into making change in the world in one particular way. Another example of a good assessment question that a board could ask is to ask perhaps your personnel committee or your finance committee to conduct an assessment of the congregation staff compensation. And in that, there are some great consultants that can work with you, both your congregational life staff, but also the UUA's Office of Church Staff Finance. But it's to really require the personnel committee to do to work with to work on assessing how well your compensation and benefits match with other congregations in your area, how well they uh, are in line with the UUA's guidelines, and to possibly ask that group if you're not in line, if they find that there is some discrepancy, and you want to come in line with that, to include in the report a phased plan. The group is recommending a phased plan for being able to reach the midpoint of all the UUA guidelines for all of your staff. Another example, and I hinted at this one before, what other ways have congregations addressed having really, really full worship services? This is a great assessment question. There are some major creativity that lots of congregations have been trying to address. When your worship services is more than 80% full and people are struggling to be able to feel like there is space for them in your congregation, what are the ways that congregations have addressed this? Are there ways that have been more effective about going to two services, or maybe having a midweek service, or encouraging online participation, or whatever those are? Maybe this is a task force that goes to answer this question from worship associates and staff. This is one assessing both what is happening in your congregation, but also what's possible from other congregations. And you might ask for a report in 6 months outlining at least 3 options to address the worship, and set a limitation because financially your congregation knows you can't expand the sanctuary. The money's not there to do that. So the board can set a limitation when it asks the questions that expanding the size of the sanctuary is not a viable option. And require that each option have additional costs and implications outlined. Like perhaps if you're going to 2 services, but one of them is on a Wednesday, maybe that means you need to pay for more staff time. Or maybe there needs to be additional support for your religious professionals to be able to do 2 worship services on 2 different days. You see the way that these some basic examples of how a congregational board can set up good questions and then name a group to be able to answer that question, to gather the information to answer that question on behalf of the board. So I'm going to challenge you all in your breakout groups to think of 2 areas of your congregation where you would love more information, where you would love to have someone that is going out and finding more information about that thing for you. And maybe one of those is operational, like the building or the finances or the church property. Maybe one is more ministry, about worship, about religious education, about faith development, about social justice ministries or small group ministries. Think through for your congregation, what are 2 areas you as a board member want to learn more about in this next year? And we'll have a question about that during your breakout time. And that information that we gather in those ways, that will help lead us to the session that we will be having next month, which is strategies and techniques for a congregational board to lead the congregation to plan for fulfilling its mission for the long term, to plan for fulfilling the future. As we say in each month, and these, I think we're going to put these in the chat. Thank you. There are additional board, I mentioned them at the beginning, some additional board trainings that are available for you all that we highly recommend. And next month, well, I didn't change that, did I? Next month, we'll be doing planning for the future. So with that, I think we are ready to go to our breakout groups.
Hi, folks. I'm the Reverend Dr. Matthew Jansen. I'm your congregational life consultant for the pastoral sized congregations, and I'm based here in Rockford, Illinois. And I'm a middle-aged white man with a gray and brown beard and glasses and a purple shirt and a green jacket. And there's a Georgia O'Keeffe print behind me and a mirror with a door, which looks like a portal to another world. We're going to go into our breakout groups. So we'll have 2 questions for you to think about in your groups. One is, what stood out for you from this presentation? What really grabbed your attention that felt particularly relevant to your work? And then the question that David just asked, what are 2 parts of your congregation's operations and ministry that you would like to assess in the next year? I love maps. The first step of a map is to figure out where you are before you know where you're going. So we're going to ask that question. So what stood out for you, and what are two things you want to assess together?
So sorry, I believe that's me. Hi, everybody. My name is Sharon Dittmar. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am a late middle-aged white woman with teal glasses and longer brownish grayish hair. And I have a beautiful photo behind me of like flowers stretching up to the sun that was created by our administrator, Chelsea Grafka. So pretty cool. We get to use these. Um, and I work with our congregations that are program sized. So as we come back from our breakout groups, I invite your primary contacts to share one takeaway they have from the group discussion, and that's going to be hard. I wrote like 10, so we're all going to have to whittle down. So if you feel so moved, let's go to the primary contacts. Let's see, we have Kiana, Janae, Chelsea, Matthew. What might you like to share?
I will go with the smalls. Um, we had some really good discussions about many things, but the one I guess I'll go into is knowing that assessment might need to get done, but other assessments are happening. So finding a way to phase in assessment in a way that feels manageable and get you to a bigger one. So to be more specific, Iowa, Dubuque is searching for a minister right now and doing some congregational assessment. So doing the kind that David was just talking about would overwhelm a small congregation. But we talked about what if for the next year, every month at the board meeting, three committees come in and explain who they are and talk about the work that they do so that you build the muscle of transparency and conversation and open dialogue. You put that in the newsletter so everyone knows what's happening. And then, you know, year two or year three, depending on what happens with their minister search, then you do a larger assessment, the style that David was talking about, because you have a little bit more capacity. But building the muscle for transparency and dialogue right now might be a better route to get them to a bigger assessment when they have more capacity later. And then the other piece that John from Mankato pulled in, and I'm going to use my language if you don't mind, John, is the difference between there being a spoke where everyone's owning the thing and going out and doing the work versus people doing the work and then happening to be members of the church and coming back in. So how do we create a balance of who's owning the social justice in a way where the church can be amplified from it, can brag about it, can say this is our work and own it, as opposed to work that just happens to be in parallel with somebody who attends. So, and with that, I will pass it to the next size up.
That's me, Matthew Johnson with the Pastoral Size. The modal response of the topics people wanted to do assessment response was building and grounds, and it wasn't close. Almost everybody in our group was thinking about how do we assess what the needs are and plan for them over the long haul. And it was tied to financial planning. That was sort of part of that piece. People also talked about things like assessing their membership processes, um, assessing their communication kind of ways, religious education, social justice partnerships, were some of the other things that came up. We also sort of talked about that kind of building the muscle thing that you just mentioned, Kiana Dene, and thinking about for our size, like, yeah, there might be 6 or 8 things we want to assess. So let's do like 2 per year and think about like a 3-year cycle of things we're looking at. And also in congregations where assessment, particularly maybe assessment of the ministry, has resulted in conflict in the past, to pick up some of these smaller areas and rebuild the trust and confidence that we can assess how we're doing before jumping in to try to do everything all at once where there's still some wounds there. So it was a great conversation. So we got to talk about building grounds deferred maintenance assessments. So maybe we'll put that in as a topic for us to work on. And I think I'll hand it up to Sharon.
Thank you, Matthew. So I'll just highlight two things from a fantastic conversation. Um, I want to mention that one of the congregations had board members engage in facilitation of small group conversations, I think after services, like with 5 to 7 members in a group. And they asked questions, just like 4 questions. And 2 of them were, when did you feel most alive here in the last 6 years? And where do you hope we will be in 5 years? And that this conversation was so rich and they learned so much about so many things because people have like wide and a diversity of responses. So even questions like that just revealed much. And oh gosh, things they want to assess. We had a very creative person say they just wanted to map the communities in the community and find out like who's in what and how relationship and power moves, which was interesting. We also had a terrific one about understanding children's and families. And um, I thought this one was just so good. Explore church relationships with their many partners. They have a large building, and so they have nonprofits renting there, as well as their members' response to that, which can be ambivalent. So, an assessment of that. And anyone else want to put in the chat, someone who's in a group? I mean, I know I skipped a lot of great things, and maybe someone else just wants to type in a couple things that came to mind for the rest of you that you want to share. And while you're typing, I will just say there was an expression of dissatisfaction with using policy governance ends for assessment.
In the moment while people are typing in the chat, I just want to say I am considering March and April both being on planning for the future. So going general planning and then a specific planning system called the 3-year rolling strategic planning process for general planning, in March and then April being on the 3-year planning process. So
Thanks, David. A lot of congregations find that 3-year planning progress like magic and rave about it. So stay tuned for that. So I don't see anything popping up in the chat. I'll still keep an eye on it. However, we are closing up. Thank you all for attending this evening. Your participation really matters, and your connections with one another are so interesting to me about how you relate to one another and learn from one another. Thanks to David for centering us in the board's work. And we'll notify you by email when the recording is posted online. Oh, David, sorry. See you, David. Um, and we encourage you to share any of this information with members of your board and or other committees that you're like someone had a mission vision group that maybe has wandered off target. And so like they could use a presentation David did earlier and share it with them, right? So they're online, please use them as you feel like would be able to assist you. We hope you're all going to see you back next month, March 11th, same time as we explore board's future planning. And in addition to monthly gatherings, we invite you to check out other opportunities and programs on our website. Chanel is sharing links because she's very good like that. Oh, and also, is Chanel, is that the form you didn't previously open the form? Find it here. Is that the form? I'm going to guess it's the form for trends. And we really do look at that and we learn from you. So thank you. All right. I think Chanel has a list of Mid-America programs in case you're interested for what we have offered or still have to offer. And we're so grateful for your service to our congregations. I think of your work actually as a ministry. You might not think of it as such or be told it's such, but it certainly is. And it's very moving to me because you're volunteers. I know you get paid a very high salary for what you do, and that's the reason you do it. Um, you do it because you really care and love your congregations and you believe in communities. That's very moving. Thank you for your ministry. To your congregation and to the UU faith, it's an honor to support you in your leadership. Okay, as we close, we're going to extinguish our chalice flames. Those of you who have a chalice flame, mine was sadly packed, so I can't access it anymore. So we extinguish our chalice flames, but not the light of leadership that we bring to our shared living faith. We will carry and share that light until we are together again. Go in peace.
Thank you for being here. We see you. We appreciate you.